Hello and welcome to the Food Fight Show. I am your host today, Nathan Harvey, coming to you live from sunny, hot Annapolis, Maryland. And let's see, we have a great episode for you today and a bunch of great panelists. We should probably talk about some things that are coming up soon, though. What do you know that's going on in the chef community? Maybe right now you're at Google Next, in which case you're not listening to this, I hope, because there's awesome stuff happening at Google Next, including a bunch of chef stuff that's going on. Later this evening, I'm speaking at a meetup, but by the time you hear this, it's going to be too late. You will have missed that meetup, so that's no good. What else do we have coming up? Well, August 2nd, we're going to be at the AWS Summit in Chicago, so if you're there, check that out. We'll be at VMworld later in August. Another thing that I'm sure we'll talk about here in a bit is the Sensu Summit, which is also coming up in August. That's in Portland. We will absolutely be there, so we're looking forward to that. Lots of DevOps days coming up, including DevOps Days Chicago. And then two events that I'm really excited about. Not that I am not excited about the others. Of course, I'm excited about all of these events, but two that are especially near and dear to my heart are the chef community summits that are coming up. So we have a community summit coming up in Seattle. That's going to be October 2nd and 3rd. That's a really awesome event. The first day of that event is open spaces. So it's a way for us and a time for us to get together developers of Chef, Inspec, Habitat, whether you're doing development, cookbook development, writing Habitat plans, writing Inspec profiles, whether you're contributing to Chef Client itself or writing some Rust to get Habitat to do more awesome things, you should totally be at the Chef Community Summit. Day one is open spaces. I can't tell you what the agenda is because it's secret. It's not really secret, but we're going to figure out what the agenda is when we get there. Day two is all about taking the ideas that we talked about on the first day and putting them into action. So it's a full day of hacking. So that's October 2nd and 3rd in Seattle. Now, a couple of weeks later, we're going to have a community summit in Europe. That's going to be in London on October 16th and 17th. The format of that is slightly different. There is a mix of presentations, both from chef employees, chef engineers, but also from our customers and our community that are out there using our products, talking about why they're using Chef, how they're being successful with Chef. And of course, when I say Chef, what I mean is Chef, Inspec, Habitat, Chef Automate, all of the tools in our ecosystem. As part of the London Community Summit, we're also going to have some hands-on workshops. So if you haven't had a chance to play with some of those technologies, come and we'll have a great learning environment where you can put your hands on that technology. And then there'll also be a component of open spaces where we'll make up the agenda on the fly. And I think there's also going to be an opportunity for you to get some chef certification at the summit in London. So that's October 16th and 17th. You can find out more information about these events and all other events that both Chef and our community are going to be participating in at events.chef.io. All right, well, enough of the self-promotion to get us started here. Let's jump right into our episode here, and I'd like to start off by introducing our panel. And so today on the show, we're going to talk about this amazing technology called Sensu. And so we're lucky enough to have the CTO of Sensu, Inc. here with us today, Sean Porter. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Great, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe, Sean, if you could just introduce yourself. First, I'll say welcome back to the Food Fight Show. It's been, I don't know, 4 years or something.
It's been a long time.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so as Nathan already mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Sensu, and I'm actually the original author of the Sensu open source project, going back 7 years now. My background is in system administration and turned operator, turned developer, kind of that whole whack of stuff. Yeah, so I guess I've been automating infrastructure with Chef for almost 10 years now, which is really crazy when I look back at it all. And yeah, it's just part of my repertoire.
That's awesome. Well, it's great to have you back on the show. Let's see, next up, we're going to go to John Carey. Hey, John.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How's it going?
Good, good. Been
Awesome.
having lots of fun with Sensu and Habitat recently.
Oh, yeah. Great. You want to, just introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from and all that.
Sure. I'm an operator or a developer turned operator. I'm an operations architect at NCR based out in Atlanta in our hospitality line of business. So we've been in the middle of an organic transformation for a while now. And we've just started to tackle the question, like, what are we really going to do about monitoring? And Sensu came to the forefront.
Oh, that's awesome. And we also have with us today Matt. Matt, say hey.
Hey, everybody. I'm Matt Broberg, VP of Community at Sensu. I get the awesome job of just connecting with the amazing people at Sensu Inc. and those in our community who are contributing to our projects or plugins around it. Got an ecosystem of 200 plus plugins that make Sensu really awesome to go along with the Nagios and other tools that connect the dots. But my background, I started with storage arrays, like doing performance analysis of storage arrays, and I just slowly crept towards open source because I just found it to be just such an inviting culture. And, so dev advocate for a few years and been working in monitoring for the last 4 or 5 and just really enjoy the way we're standardizing on tools and how it complements what we do with automation so that we can have visibility into the crazy stuff that we can, just write a single line and get all that deployed at once.
It sounds like you needed open source to enrich your soul after being around storage arrays for too long.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I was deep in VMware Stack as well, and I have a lot of respect for those that use it and keep things running with it. But the momentum going towards open source as a way of delivering value and competing to ensure that users have the highest quality interface to what they have to do, as opposed to just their obliged contract with the single vendor, it means a lot to me. So I'm happy that we're all open source users.
All right, that's awesome. So that's our panel today. Listen, if you're tuning in live and you have questions for our panelists, questions about Sensu or anything else that we bring up today, I invite you to join us in the Chef community Slack. You can get there at community-slack.chef.io. And once you're into the community Slack, we have a channel there named Food Fight, so you can pop over with your questions. And I'm going to kick us off with the first question. Sean, what is Sensu? Give us a quick overview.
Sure. So Sensu is an open source monitoring tool that really eliminates the need to build custom tools in order to solve your own unique monitoring problems. We recently started to refer to Sensu as this monitoring event pipeline, which allows Sensu users to effectively create pipelines to process their own monitoring data for things like sending incident alerts, storing time series data, generating reports. These pipelines are comprised of everything from service checks that you run or input APIs for your data from your applications, from your infrastructure. And then you get event filters to filter that data down, mutators to transform it, and handlers to take action and do things with it. We've started to think about Sensu in terms of workflow automation for monitoring. And this is really cool because it's open source. Therefore, you can take those workflows with you. They're portable. You can also share them with other people, which we think is really cool. So, I mean, it's super dope because Sensu is really empowering operators and engineers through sharing. And what's really cool about this is it gives me really good feels because I've had a similar experience with the Chef community and now Habitat. So that's kind of like Sensu, what it is in a nutshell.
All right, so Sean, I have to ask you, even 10 years ago or so, when you, maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, 7 years ago, when you started Sensu, I seem to recall there were a lot of monitoring tools out there in the market. So why create another?
So, I mean, at the time I was a Nagios user and, and a lot of open source tools around that ecosystem and trying to combine them in order to solve my problems, being like an early company on cloud with ephemeral infrastructure, it was falling apart for me. And all the things I could buy at the time and even today don't necessarily directly solve my unique problem. So doing it open source made sense because I was already an open source proponent and user. So I wanted that to be a thing. And really identifying the fact that we needed a framework or a composable pipeline in order to solve these problems. Like my infrastructure problems are not the same, probably not the same, or they're at least similar to John's problems. But the components that you use to solve them are the same. So that was kind of the idea. And, originally I was like, okay, this thing's gonna be open source. Maybe 5 people are gonna look at it and want to use it. Obviously that wasn't the case, and it, quickly grew. and a community just kind of grew organically around it. And then plugin ecosystems started to come together, and it just felt really good. It felt really right. And then it kind of just had its own traction and velocity from that point.
And this idea of highly customized monitoring was really, really important in our selection process whenever we considered Sensu, because the market is saturated with like the old IT style monitoring that provides like the gigantic red button of win. Like you press it and you know everything about everything and you're going to be successful. And oftentimes that's just a lie. And if it's not a lie, you need a data science degree to figure out what's going on with all the information that you have. So we really needed a way to deliver customized monitoring and to be able to flow that through our environments, right? Because we don't want to develop monitoring code and monitoring procedures just for production, right? We want everything to be as production-like as possible, all the way down to the workstation if we can.
That's really cool, John. So, John, what are you doing with Sensu today? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the answer might be a little disappointing. Not a whole lot yet, because we are in the middle of a POC for it. But we've kind of already started to sell internally that this is going to be the answer to a lot of problems. We waited. We have two goals. We want Sensu everywhere, because we want to know what's going on everywhere. And we also want Habitat everywhere so that we can start to use that infrastructure. So we kind of paired those goals together and used the two products to kind of shoehorn each other across our infrastructure. But like my current work now, just to illustrate how easy it is to deploy the newer version here, is like a one-click, one-shot kitchen habitat-driven deployment for a full Sensu stack, including a Bastion ring and the front end, a couple of back-end nodes, and InfluxDB and Grafana and all that, just with Kitchen Converge. So that experience has gone well enough that we're considering this in our on-prem data centers, auto-scaling instances out in Azure, as well as potentially all the way down to like the edge where things are scary in restaurants and things like that. Wow,
that's super awesome. So I want to come back to some of the Habitat stuff, but before we get there, I want to talk just for a little bit more about sort of the history of Sensu and sort of how the community around Sensu has come up. Now, I mentioned earlier that we had Sean on the Food Fight show. It was back in 2012, if you can imagine that we were first talking about Sensu. And in fact, looking at the show notes there, the episode was called #monitoring love with Sensu, because there was there was if you were in the industry at the time, you might have remembered there was this monitoring hate hashtag that was going around, and Sensu really came onto the scene, and there was actually a talk at a DevOps Days that was all about monitoring love. And it was interesting because I think one of the things that really struck me was that Sensu did have a new approach to the infrastructure of the time, right? We were all moving to the cloud or on our way there. And Sean, as you mentioned, sort of ephemeral instances that are going to come up and go away. And things like other more traditional monitoring tools simply couldn't keep up with with the dynamic nature of our infrastructure. And so I think that was really cool to see Sensu coming along and handling that. So, Sean, can you walk us through sort of how does Sensu deal with that lifecycle of instances that are going to appear, maybe work on some workload for a little bit, and then they disappear? So once they disappear, you have to alert everyone, right?
Definitely not. I mean, yeah, on that episode way back in 2012, I think I was saying that our team was getting around like 80 pages a day before Sensu, due to like plumbing issues of our monitoring tools causing false positives. And since you kind of address those, it really addresses this through like two ways. First, it's an agent-based monitoring system. So you run this agent on all the hosts, whether they be bare metal, VMs, containers. And when they come up, they automatically register themselves with the system. And the same can be said when they are actually shut down gracefully or decommissioned. And in the cases of that they're not, Sensu realizes that they're missing and says, hey, this machine just disappeared. It seems like there's still chef data in the chef server. There's a good chance this thing means something to you, wake up. So that's one way. And the other way is that Sensu provides a number of APIs so that you can have services communicate with the API and register and deregister those things that you're monitoring and care about. A good example of this is like with Kubernetes or Docker Swarm. We can have tooling that talks to that API, and as pods come up and get torn down, they get added and registered with Kubernetes and then removed. So it's all these building blocks and all the pieces you need that fits how infrastructure looks like at your company.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it certainly was, I'm sure we've all worked, if you've been in the industry long enough, you've worked in places where a node disappearing is a failure mode, right? But that is no longer the case today. So Matt, I'd love to talk a little bit about the community. Sean mentioned like there's data mungers and like you can hook into other things, and we're aggregating data. We're just have all these tools that we can use to compose our pipeline. So how does the community play into how those tools get built?
Yeah, Nathan, it's a great question. And it starts, I mean, you're bringing us on the kind of story going back to 2012. Who would have thought that a few years later in 2015, a few like highly active community members started to collect all those different pieces, the different scripts that people were running, and seeing that they were like a set of best practices that somebody understands in our industry, and putting them into a format that we call plugins. So it's a collection of those checks, metrics, mutators, and handlers, all wrapped up in a way that's like a one command line deploy. So that Sensu can grab them, run them. And what's really the core of that is that there's some sort of atomic expertise of all these different operators in our industry. And our goal with Sensu is to make sure people have a way to share that effectively. So fast forward to today, we curate a GitHub organization called Sensu Plugins for discoverability. And under there's over 200 plugins for literally everything that you would need to use. So native plugins to Sensu, but we're really big proponents of like use what you need and what you have. So if you have Nagios expertise, bring your Nagios plugins. They will run out of the box with the Sensu as it's built. We've got a connector for Prometheus, the telemetry, the cloud native telemetry solution that is absolutely one as a standard. There's no reason that standard can't also be used in Sensu, so that you have everything from your old school Nagios checks, SNMP v2 in there as well, because we all have something that speaks that, statsd interface to accept that info, and anything you can push to a TCP or UDP packet. So we try to aggregate those best practices in plugins, and then there's a bunch of contribution coming into our documentation in the form of guides and best practices from users. And our goal is just to make sure people keep sharing, because we think like the greatest untapped resource in this part of the world is like monitoring expertise of operators.
And that spirit of openness cannot be understated, especially when you're walking into a spirit of transformation and or a situation of transformation where people are really afraid that in flipping the tables and changing your monitoring infrastructure, that you're going to leave them holding the bag, right? They may not have a job, right? But when you can go and say, all those things that you've already done, that's cool. We'll do them over here too. Let's work together and make it happen. It really totally changes the conversation from a destructive, like, no, we already have this kind of thing, to a more collaborative kind of environment.
Yeah, it's like a better together situation for you and the people you're consulting with.
Yeah, that's cool. So, there are certainly some parallels here with the chef community, right? The chef community has had cookbooks that we've published and shared with one another over the years. One of the challenges that we've faced in the chef community, maybe I'll just mention two of them and see how Sensu is dealing with this. The first is, one of the best things about the Chef Supermarket is that anyone with an account can publish a cookbook to the Chef Supermarket. And one of the worst things about the Chef Supermarket is that anyone with an account can publish a cookbook to the Chef Supermarket. That's not to say that anyone that's doing that is doing anything nefarious, but sometimes those cookbooks are good, sometimes they're bad, and good and bad is very subjective. So, like I said, I'll ask two questions just so I can listen. But the first question is, like, how do you deal with identifying which of the plugins are of high quality in the Sensu ecosystem? And then the other thing that, similar to what's happened in Chef, is 5 years ago, our perspective on what made a good cookbook is very different than our perspective today on what makes a good cookbook. So how is your community and how is the tooling changing, and your sort of philosophy to building out those plugins changed over the time?
Yeah, I have a perspective there, and I think Sean and I are actively debating this right now, which it'll be fun to have live. I think it's appropriate to have a food fight on Food Fight. But as I think about it, I mean, our philosophy is adapting. I think for the last number of years, it's been very hands off. Like, you run your best monitoring. Like, Godspeed. We're going to give you all the tools. If you cut yourself with them, cool. If you don't, awesome. Tell your story. And that's been a good marching order for quite a long time. But I think we're maturing with Sensu, the open source project, having support from Sensu Inc., having a company behind it. We're growing to realize, like, we have the resources to be more directed in, like, what is a best practice. Because my take on community building is, like, it's nice that people have options, but they really want answers. And, like, give me a happy path so I feel like I know what I'm doing. So we're actively exploring, like, what is it like if we have a verification process where we say, like, if you have this level of standard library usage and this level of testing, this level of documentation, we stamp that so that they can be elevated to the top. But then that also begs the question of elevated to the top of what? We have to help you visualize and find and discover plugins across the ecosystem. So we're actively exploring, what does our supermarket look like at Sensu. But given that, like, Sean, do you have thoughts, comments? I'm happy for a retort too. Let's get this.
You put it too well, Matt. You didn't give me much to work with there.
Yeah, no. I also don't like my perspective on this. Quick, go.
I for one am glad you're thinking about this. I tried the Sensu 1 a couple years ago on some build infrastructure, and, like, it was cool and it worked really fast. There's a lot of things to deploy, but that's okay. And then when I got to the plugin selection, I got totally lost. I got to the point where I thought, like, this is cool for our build servers, but I'm not taking this to production.
Oh, that's so valid.
That's changed though.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's like it's analysis paralysis. It's the paradox of choice. It's whatever, like, story you want to use, but there's just so much to choose and no one telling you where to look to compare. So I feel you, Nathan. Like, your story of cookbooks is very much the world we're in too. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, we've evolved a lot over time. I remember the early days of sharing cookbooks where you could go as a user of a cookbook and rate the cookbooks, give it 1 to 5 stars. And what we learned from that experiment was that you didn't have the knowledge you needed to rate the cookbook when it was time to rate the cookbook, which was when you were downloading the cookbook. So the net result was either you hated the cookbook so much that you went back and gave it 1 star, or you or your friend published that cookbook, in which case you gave it 5 stars. And so the distribution was the reverse of a bell curve, right? It was like this upside down U. And there were no statistically valid numbers. Like, there simply weren't enough ratings given the number of downloads per cookbook. So, like, we threw that out. We now have these cookbook quality metrics, which are things not dissimilar to what you talked about. Like, does it have a README? How many contributors are there to this cookbook? All things that we can test automatically. The key thing, though, for us in the supermarket that I would encourage you to think about, we're lucky in the chef world where we have a tool like Food Critic that can do some static analysis on your cookbook and give you immediate feedback. What we've been doing with our cookbook quality metrics is pushing as many of those into Food Critic so that as you're developing a cookbook, you can get that feedback without having to upload it to the supermarket to figure out how many quality metrics did I pass. So the more and faster feedback you can give, the better. That's my advice.
I'm scribbling down notes for my requirements for this next project real quick. Be right back.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. We could do a whole episode on that, and it could be a pretty healthy debate. So then, but it also kind of begs the next question, which is, if I'm using Sensu today and I'm using a particular plugin, it's likely that within, I don't know, N days, there's going to be a new version of that plugin. So what's my workflow like for managing, keeping those plugins up to date? Now do I have to patch my monitoring systems as well? What does that look and feel like?
I'd rather pass it to Sean on the actual deployment side, but I do want to say that we've got a really healthy release policy on plugins. We're very strictly semvert, and with great release notes and a limited number of people that actually publish the package, so you can feel very certain that somebody has tested it and that the semantic versioning is going to be in a reliable fashion. A breaking change is breaking, and a non-breaking one is actually something you can just go to. So that was a huge milestone for us to hit last year, and I just want to kind of props to the community for getting that, to become a standard.
That's awesome.
So one of the advantages a Sensu plugin has over many other pieces of software is a very clean and simple API. I mean, service checks are really, it's like it does three things. It outputs some data to standard out, to tell you information or even metrics. So I guess that's technically two things for metric collection. And the other is using exit status to indicate severity, whether it's healthy, maybe it's in a warning zone, or critical or unknown. And this really simple API makes it, very approachable to develop these plugins. But as Matt has already mentioned, we do have like our Ruby plugin selection has like these very nice standards, as well as some helper libraries to help you go along the way and stay consistent with everything else, as well as those helper plugins get updated, a clear path forward to update your plugin to use it. So it's just really cool. It's like by having such a clear, simple API, it's so approachable. And then we also have this cool path with Ruby plugins and a developer experience that's consistent across them all.
Clarity can sometimes limit complexity. Do you see much any like demand for expanding that footprint from the community, or is it pretty atomic?
So it's pretty good. So one thing I would say to touch on the like simplicity and complexity thing, you can put as much or as little as you want in a plugin. It's really like a bundle of logic, how you may monitor a particular service or measure a particular resource, and then you bundle that in that plugin, and then somebody's able to use it without truly understanding what it's doing. So that's one thing. But then with Sensu, we've gone beyond the simple spec 2, is that the new monitoring agent in 2.0 is able to extract data from the output of those checks into a structured metric format, which is really cool. So then we're doing a little bit of extraction and mutation on the edge now, to provide a lighter, faster, more performant back-end process experience. So I definitely went on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, I think I'm very happy with our standardization around service checks, as well as stats-D, as well as our standard APIs for input.
That's super cool. And I think, again, going back in time, like it plays right along with the history. Like Nagios checks have always been something that you can use with Sensu. And so making it easy to move into Sensu is pretty awesome. But speaking of moving into Sensu, I know that there's 2.0 is out, is about to be out. What's the status, and what's awesome about Sensu 2?
Yeah, so Sensu 2, we're planning to have a general availability for October, which is super exciting. So there's two main things about Sensu 2.0. I mean, first of all, it was all about making it easy. So making it easier to get started and having a lower amount of maintenance over time. So make it very approachable. There's now only two components. There's the Sensu backend, which includes the web UI, the APIs, and all that. That's the event pipeline piece. And then the Sensu agent, which is now much lighter than the 1.x agent. So it's a smaller footprint, less memory, less CPU usage, which is really cool. And then the other is about expanding to cover more technologies. So Sensu's always been about the full technology spectrum. So we realized the fact that most organizations, their infrastructure is messy, right? New is exciting and fleeting, and old is forever. So I mean, Sensu's able now to, with 2.0, is able to monitor not only bare metal and VMs and containers, but we've also updated the data model and APIs to accommodate extremely ephemeral orchestrated container platforms, as well as serverless. So yeah, to go back to those two things, it's all about making it easy, and it's all about expanding its coverage of the technology spectrum.
That's cool. Now you mentioned Sensu is agent-based, and obviously there's a lot of workloads being deployed in containers today. So does that agent live within the same container as my application? How does that work?
So we're really promoting two patterns there. So in the case of Kubernetes, I'll use that as, turns out it's becoming fairly prevalent, is that you've got your Sensu sidecar. So effectively, having a separate container bolted on into a pod, running the Sensu agent, being able to run checks against your application as well as provide its interfaces to that app. So that sidecar pattern is definitely one thing we promote. And the other is, as Damon said, are running a Sensu agent per host, making it available to all the app instances on that particular host. So these are really the patterns that we're promoting for containerization.
I'd also throw out there that Sensu is an event pipeline in its barest form. So you don't have to use the agent if your container can emit information within a pod context. If we're talking Kubernetes, you can write to the Sensu port that you set, and like you're writing to localhost, and we'll suck up that data as well. So there are plenty of options for more ephemeral styles. And as people move more towards libraries, if you are already on the Prometheus bandwagon, use a Prometheus library, send it to Sensu, and we'll consume that as well.
Yeah, what's really cool with Sensu 2.0 is to build on Matt's point is that it is really becoming, like, the backend on its own is becoming the standalone thing. And the agent is no longer a requirement, which is really cool. Having those new, more capable, powerful APIs in the backend really opens the doors to just instrumenting applications and having them emit that data, which is really cool. Just more options to work with.
Yeah, that was going to be the next question I asked, actually, is how many of your, or how much are you seeing in the real world? And John, maybe you can weigh in on this. How much are developers having to build hooks into Sensu into their applications, or emitting that data out of their applications? How much work is going in there?
We haven't gotten into that yet, but we've given it some thought. And the suggestion that we'll broadcast is just use statsd, emit it over UDP, and walk away. And that should, especially if you can hook it into your log level or whatever, then it's essentially seamless.
And what's really cool about statsd is that, I guess it was like 2012, around that area, like statsd became like a standard considered an industry standard for instrumentation and emitting that telemetry data. So there's like a ton of libraries out there for pretty much every language runtime. So that experience that John was describing there is really available to anyone.
Yeah, that's super cool. Now, John, I know over at NCR you all have been playing with Habitat a good bit and experimenting with that. And I know there's been, as you mentioned, some work around Test Kitchen, and Habitat and Sensu. I wonder if, from your perspective, if you could help our listeners by first just telling us what the heck is Habitat, but then talking about how Habitat is helping you with evaluating Sensu and with starting to play with Sensu.
Yeah. So that reaction, like, what is Habitat? I think when the first talk came out announcing it, that was probably the reaction 90% of the community went into after seeing the talk. But something happened in the last year that completely turned around, the explanation and the messaging, and I think it's really there in a good spot now. So Habitat is all about application automation, right? Chef is really, really good at enforcing state on a node. But if you start to do something like, all right, I want you to make sure that all these system libraries are in place, but I'd also like you to deploy the application. Now, don't just deploy it. Make sure that you only do these nodes at this time and these nodes at this time, and you try to do orchestration, you're going to have a bad time in most instances. Habitat handles that through supervisor orchestration, right? So it'll deliver your software for you in a sane way. It handles the configuration of that software, and it wraps it all up. I think one of the biggest selling points for Habitat internally for us is we can go to an application team and say, hey, you want to go do containerization? Well, do it in Habitat first. That way you can continue to deploy things on your infrastructure, and you can export to containers whenever you're ready, and you're good to go. So Habitat just wraps your application. I think the explanation I gave at ChefConf was it deploys your service and it knows about all the other services around it, right? And those two things together, really make the Habitat experience. With Sensu, what we were looking for, I guess my initial experience with deploying Sensu 1 back in the day was like, this thing is really cool. No one's going to be able to deploy it but me, because there's a bunch of services to install and there's supporting infrastructure like Redis and all that. And I don't want to tell somebody else to do that. I want it to be simple. And the simplest way to deliver something that we've seen in the last year has been to put it into Habitat, because that standardizes your interface for taking your thing and putting it somewhere. Right. So we wanted to wrap Habitat around Sensu to deliver it, and that experience has been pretty amazing, because Sensu is just Go binaries. Right? They run everywhere. So we asked Sean, maybe not so nicely, to figure out what he can do to give us Habitat packages, and he paired up with some contractor friends and generated those packages. We ran into an instance a couple weeks ago where I realized, oh crap, like we don't have an agent package or an agent plan for Windows. What can we do? And Sean, says, hey, let's jump on a call. And within 30 minutes, with my kids screaming at me to go to Taekwondo, we had a package generated for Windows, a candidate package to hand off for official submission into the core plan. And it took 30 minutes and it worked. It's cool.
That's really cool. So Sean, you got to play with some Habitat. Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience from your perspective?
Yeah, it's really cool just to see, how Habitat approaches like application and service deployment automation. It's definitely a fairly large shift from, as a sysadmin, what I've been used to with traditional config management. So it's cool to see it in action, and also be able to see how it gets developed and applied around a piece of software that you had a hand in, right? So Sensu, for me, seeing it operate and run this piece of software in a real context is super exciting. And what's really cool is, like, I've always had my own understanding of what Habitat provides and what it is, and I've always been like, well, it's kind of like a smart package with some really cool bits to like automate and tie things together with some discovery components. And it's cool to actually just put that into practice and see these things in action. And now, I don't think I was wrong with how I understood Habitat. Maybe not. I was missing a few things, but it's just really cool to see. And of course, I want to do more Habitat. Now I just have to find more excuses.
Yeah, that's great. One of the other benefits, I think, of Habitat is the ease with which, or the way that the system itself will handle upgrades and updates. John, I wonder if you're using sort of that auto update capability anywhere yet within your environment from Habitat?
Yeah. So we've got a service. About a year ago, we determined that communicating to our customers when something goes wrong is pretty important for us. And we wrote a series of Node.js microservices to handle communication. So, an event is created, we're going to fire off to a bunch of different tools to generate RCA reports and emails to customers and all that. And we've used channel promotions to handle that. So we have an instance that sits in Azure away from the rest of our infrastructure. And, as we push things or move them from the unstable to the stable channel, we just see deployments there. That service has been running with essentially 100% functional uptime for a better part of a year, and I've only logged into the box 4 times. There is no deployment event; it just happens. That's one of the more desirable features in Habitat. On the Sensu side, I think what we want to see, or the vision I'm trying to craft around, is I would like to see our checks appear as Habitat packages as well. They should be versioned and they should flow across environments. So we'll design Habitat packages that interact with the Sensu Cuddle utility and take those checks and bring them, flow them from environment to environment. And no human being has to be involved in that process. We just go to our private builder and say, move to the next channel, move to the next channel.
Yeah, that's super cool. Super cool. So going back again, like when we first had Sensu on, I mentioned it was monitoring hate and then monitoring love, and today, like the buzzword is observability. So how does Sensu fit into this this movement around observability?
You had to go there, Nathan. Yeah, so I think when talking about monitoring and observability, I think Greg, our VP of engineering, put this like the best way, which is monitoring is the what, observability is the why. And this idea that monitoring is really about probing and measurement, and it looks for symptoms, and it really tells you what is broken or what is indicating a particular state that might be unhealthy. And then observability as a quality is like helping you answer questions, helping you arrive to a conclusion as to why that particular service got into that state. By no means are they mutually exclusive. I think any messaging that will say otherwise is, wrong. So that's kind of how I look at it. And you'll always need monitoring because you always need to know that something is broken. You don't want your customers, your users, to be that monitoring system. They still might see that something is wrong, like if your app is unable to degrade gracefully, but at least you were notified that something was awry, at least before they knew it. And so Sensu is always in that space. It's always about the what, and then it's giving you enough rich context to lead to the why. So it kind of sits in this interesting space where it can tell you that something's broken, and it's like it can capture information about the system at that particular state. And that's what's leading to the why, which is really cool, which will make it faster for you to be able to come to those conclusions.
Yeah, this is the kernel of one of our biggest, most important issues for our operations team right now and moving on into the future. We have monitoring in place. We have people that are being alerted to just act alerts all night long, all across the globe. So we're really trying to dig in and say, like, how can we draw intelligence from the noise here? And we're hoping that statistical analysis on the data that we get out of Sensu, as well as filters inside InfluxDB and all that, is the best way to do that. We got a lot of hope for it.
That's awesome. Now, at the top of the show, I mentioned coming up in August is the Sensu Summit. Matt, can you tell us about?
Well, what? Sensu Summit? Yeah. Yes, this is our second year of hosting a user-focused conference with some thought leadery inspiration elements to it as well. So it's a 2-day community single-track conference. First day, all awesome talks. Kick off the morning with Kelsey Hightower, who's doing a fireside chat conversation with Caleb and Sean on kind of state of the industry as it relates to monitoring. I'm sure they'll dig more into monitoring and observability and getting to where we are today. And that brings you through stories from like absolutely amazing users of Sensu, from Box to Sean mentioned earlier, it's just a whole hog use Sensu to replace just the 350,000 checks, to GE, to T-Mobile, a lot of like very big companies that have done very big things with Sensu. That's what it's about. And then mingling and community building, great event. And then the day 2 is a mix of kind of hacking time and tutorials in an unconference way, with a few that are dialed in, like great partners. In Influx Data is going to do an like intro to InfluxDB as it relates to Sensu, because we're doing some very cool things there. And then Grafana has one of how to visualize data coming out of Sensu as well. So that's exciting. And then a bunch of other things are sure to pop up and be fantastic. So we'd love to have people there. I'm going to give you, Nathan, a special discount code for Food Fight listeners, and we'll get that into the README and into your Slack.
Awesome.
But most importantly, like it's really about people that are either interested in and are trying to consider Sensu, or like currently users that are trying to beef up and be part of our future. So we'd love to have all of you there.
That's awesome. And where can I get more information about the summit?
Great point. Sensu.io/summit will give you all the info you need.
All right, that's awesome. And now we're getting close on time, so I do want to just give you an opportunity to give our listeners some places where they can go to learn more about Sensu. Sean, as an example, I know you gave a talk at this year's Chef Conf that was all about Sensu. So what was that all about?
Yeah, so I mean, Chef as a config management or automation tool, allows you to move fast, deploy your apps and infrastructure quickly, and this idea again that infrastructure is messy and it's able to work in these like heterogeneous environments, and then Sensu's really its partner in crime on the monitoring side. That's basically what the talk was about, and how Sensu, in particular, Sensu 2.0, leads itself to be that partner, and how Chef can drive it. And it was kind of just a quick and dirty tour through the new Chef cookbook for driving Sensu 2.0 and what that looks like. And it was a lot of fun to do. And it was a great room of folks. So yeah, that was just one particular instance I got to talk about Sensu and Chef together.
Yeah, that's cool. So what's the best place to go to get started with Sensu? How do I start?
So a good spot. Well, I mean, you could hit up sensu.io to learn a bit about it, and then you can also hit up docs.sensu.io for getting started guides for both, Sensu 1x as well as 2x, and get started in introduce yourselves to the plugin ecosystem as well. So I'd say those are probably the best places to start. Matt, do you have something to add?
And let me know how to get your butt out to Portland in August for Sensu Summit, because that's going to be the most exciting, engaging way to really let Sensu settle in, and also realize just how amazing our community of users is.
I also had to get Nathan a better shirt. We got to replace that heavy water one with a Sensu shirt. That's an OG heavy water one. That's like revision 1.
Exactly. Well, I have to say, speaking of Chef Conf, I got this amazing sticker at Chef Conf that was super good. So hopefully there'll be more of those to be had at the Sensu Summit.
Yes. The Sensu Hearts, for those on podcast mode, yeah, the Sensu Hearts Chef sticker was one of those brilliant ideas from, gotta give her a shout out, Meg Hartley, our director of community programs, and now it's just like a thing we want to do. We'll have that at the show for sure for you.
Awesome. And coming off of Chef Conf, which was just back in May, it is truly incredible to connect with a community of people that care about similar technical topics, and you get to work with them all the time online and collaborate together online, but then to get into the same room as them, there's really nothing that's the same. So if you are a Sensu user, if you're considering becoming a Sensu user, want to contribute, I definitely recommend getting out to the summit. There's nothing like being in the room with all of those community members. All right, well, we're just about out of time. I think it's a good time for us to move to the picks. So this is the point in our show where we go around the horn and ask each one of our panelists to share something that they've been reading lately, a tool that they've been using, a beverage they've been drinking, whatever it is, whatever comes to mind that our listeners might be interested in. And actually, I have an extra request this time as we go around the picks. If you, when it's your turn, if you could just let our listeners know where they can find you online. So whether that's Twitter or Instagram or what have you. So John, how about we'll start with you?
Cool. So being that this is the first time I've ever done a picks, I agonized over the decision here for a long time, and I figured I would first use it for good. So bethematch.org, join the bone marrow registry. This is something I had been intending to do for a while, and it just kind of slipped my mind until the other day, and I did it. The chances that you'll be called are very slim, but if you are, the chance that you save a life is pretty high. So do that. And then the selfish one is a band. All right, so my current development jam has been a band called The Dead South. These guys are pretty cool. It was a suggestion from a friend. I'm a metalhead, so when banjos are involved, it tends to not work out too well, but these guys did.
That's awesome. I want to second your Be the Match. I will say that I've been on the registry for at least a decade, have not yet been called. So what took maybe 3 minutes in a doctor's office for me to join that registry with the potential of saving a life someday, totally worth it.
There's actually no doctor's office involved anymore. They send a swab, and you cheek swab, and you mail it off, and you're good to go.
Man, I bled for that organization.
That's both exciting and terrifying.
Right, and I can be found at Twitter at jcarrydev and carryhouse.net, the underused blog.
Excellent. Many of us in this community have underused blogs. Matt, let's go to you next.
Yeah, happy to. So my personal pick, it's been hot as all hell in Portland for coming on a few weeks, like in the high 90s. If you're looking for a really sippable, really tasty beer, I've fallen in love with St. Archer Hoppy Pilsner. It's super crisp, it's flavorful, but it's not like that over the top kind of flavor profile that an IPA gives you. So perfect summer beer. Can't stop drinking them. They're really, really good. And then on kind of like a personal tool choice, I love little things that make me make my workflow more fun. I've been using Alfred as an alternative to the default Spotlight search on Mac for forever. But there is a really cool feature to be able to configure shorthand codes. So I have in there a snippet for all of the GitHub ways in which you make an emoji. I can do that on any command, like any place in on my laptop just by hand. And I think that's really, really helpful. That's a default snippet pack you can get. And there's another one released recently in an article on Zapier that is, it brings your awareness to using weak language so that you show yourself as more confident online. It was particularly targeted towards women in high tech. I'm using it quite a bit, and I'm finding that I use it might a lot, and it puts a question mark. Like, does it really might? Does it really may? Or do you just want to say something? So I'm finding that it's very helpful, especially for us that are fully remote, to be clearer and more direct with their peers.
Awesome. And how can we find you online, Matt?
Oh, sure. I'm on pretty much everywhere as MB Broberg.
Sweet. All right, let's go to you next, Sean.
Awesome. So I got 2 books that I've been just alternating between. The Manager's Path, which has been very helpful as Sensu's grown rapidly, and myself along with it in my role and position. So The Manager's Path, fantastic book. Definitely recommend for anyone who deals with humans, which is everyone. And the Lean Product Playbook. This is a new one for me. I'm just starting to dig into it. But the overall thing is like how to innovate with minimum viable products and rapid customer feedback. Just something that I'm tinkering with. But again, I've just started it, so take that with a grain of salt. And then one thing that I've been really enjoying is I got a Fitbit watch, and I'm not saying get this Fitbit watch, but like any sort of personal device that has the GPS tracking ability. And I've been getting outside, going for a lot more walks and going for runs, enjoying this heat, getting nice and sweaty, but feeling good for it. So those are my picks. And you can find me online at PorterTech, pretty much on Twitter or IRC, and a lot of community Slacks.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be sure to put all of that all of those details and links and so forth into our show notes. For my picks, I have 3 today. So I recently took a vacation, and so you should do that. That's my first pick. But I did this special thing that I do every year. I take at least a week off in the summer, and the thing that I do, and I've mentioned it before on the show, and I want to encourage everyone to do that, I left my phone at home for the entire week. And so it's really great to just be fully disconnected, take that time off to recharge, invest that time in yourself. It's super important. One of the things that I did while I was on vacation, though, was I read this great book. I'm going to show it to you if you're watching the video, but it's called Lean Out, The Struggle for Gender Equality in Tech and Startup Culture. This book is edited by Alyssa Shavinsky. She gave it to me after speaking at DevOps Days DC, which was an awesome talk, a great conference. But it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It will give you a really interesting perspective on some of the really tough times that people that don't look like me have within our industry. And so definitely check that out. And then my third and final pick is actually a company. It's this company called Indelient. We've been doing a bunch of work with them. And in fact, they've done work helping get Sensu packaged up as Habitat. We've done a bunch of work with them at other customers. If you have an opportunity to work with this team, I highly recommend it. They're a great bunch of engineers and consultants that will help you out. You can find me online at Nathan Harvey, but you have to misspell my name just like my father did. So it's Nathen Harvey. And with that, that brings us to the end of the show. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And I hope to see you all at the Sensu Summit. And until next time, chefs, keep it hot.